Thank you. Thank you. When I was 17 years old, I decided that I'm going to be a medical doctor. This decision made my grandmother, my Jewish grandmother, the happiest woman in the world. Unfortunately, this resolution did not last for long. Before my 18th birthday, I decided that being a doctor was actually not for me. So, with much fear and trepidation, I mustered up all my courage and went to my grandmother to break the bad news to her. Needless to say, she was distraught. And after I told her, "Grandma, I'm no longer going to be a doctor," she said to me the following. She said, but I told all my friends." So what I'm going to do today is dedicate my lecture to my grandmother. And I'm going to talk about health. And I'm going to do what doctors do. I'm going to prescribe. So unfortunately, my grandmother is no longer around to enjoy, to quell, to be proud of me. But hopefully she's somewhere watching and listening to Happier TV. So here is what I've got for you. For you, I have today a wonder drug. This is what the wonder drug can do for you. This wonder drug can make you feel good. In fact, it can make you feel high. This wonder drug can enhance your self-esteem, whether it's your physical self-esteem, how you feel about your body, whether it's your overall self-esteem, how you feel about yourself. This wonder drug can also make you calmer, more relaxed, less anxious and nervous. This wonder drug can make you think better. It can improve your memory, it can make you more creative, it can significantly enhance your cognitive functioning. This wonder drug can also make you more attractive. Now, if this is not enough, this very wonder drug can improve your love life. For both men and women, significantly improve your sex life. Okay, I know you're worried now. This is too good to be true, I know. But you don't need to worry, because there are no negative side effects. You're not going to die a day after you take this drug. You know, what a way to die, right? But you're not going to die. In fact, you may even live longer. It's completely, I promise you, guaranteed legal. And I know now you're ready to pay big dollars for this drug. You don't need to. It's free, complimentary of Happier TV. Just enjoy. What is this drug? Well, actually, this drug is a cocktail. The cocktail comprises 4 parts. The first part of the cocktail is physical exercise. Specifically, the prescription is a minimum of 30 minutes, 3 times a week of physical exercise. Second, it's about deep breathing. Specifically, 4 minutes total of deep breathing every day. The third component of the cocktail is sleep. Between 7 to 8 hours a day on average. And finally, the fourth part is touch. Here, the specific prescription is 12 hugs a day, but you cannot overdose on this. So 24 is fine too. Now, here is the thing. This may be overwhelming for you. It's a significant cocktail. So even if you take one part of the cocktail or 2 or 3 parts, it will still have a significant impact on your life. You will be happier, healthier, better off. So I want to elaborate very briefly on each one of these 4 components. Let's begin with exercise. There's research showing that regular exercise, as little as 30 minutes, 3 times a week of aerobic exercise. That could be jogging or walking or swimming or, best of all, dancing. 30 minutes, 3 times a week of physical exercise has the exact same effect as our most powerful psychiatric medication. In fact, it works in the same way. Releasing norepinephrine, serotonin, dopamine, these are your feel-good chemicals in the brain. Now, this does not mean we can just, throw away our psychiatric medication. There is still a lot of value to that, and in many cases, psychiatric medication, antidepressants or anti-anxiety drugs have saved lives. However, what the research is showing is that if we can exercise, it can make a big difference, not just for overcoming depression or anxiety, also for simply raising levels of well-being. We see this for all ages. So there's a lot of research, mostly documented by John Ratey from Harvard Medical School, about children and physical exercise. So what it was shown that schools that introduced regular physical exercise, those kids were happier. School violence went down significantly by over 60%, whether it's verbal or physical violence. And the students actually performed better as a result of regular physical exercise. There was research done in Denmark showing that kids who walked to school, that had a nice walk to school, were more likely to perform better. Why? Because they were more focused, more concentrated, more creative. Cognitive functioning improved. Also in the workplace, more and more workplaces are introducing physical exercise. Why? Because people concentrate better. Because employees become more creative. They're more likely to think outside the box, not while exercising, but after exercising. Relationships improve. People are calmer, more open, more accepting. Teamwork is better as a result of regular physical exercise. Not just for children, not just in the workplace, for all ages. So this is research reported again by John Ratey on healthy aging. What he did was a meta-analysis looking at all the studies conducted in this area, showing that regular physical exercise, even if we started later on in life, reduces the likelihood of Alzheimer or dementia by 52%. 52%. There is no medication that comes even close to having this effect. Now, when I heard of this study, I went to my mom and I said to her, Mom, because that's her name, I said to her, Mom, you know, until now I recommended that you exercise because, you know, you'll feel better and so on. Well, I'm no longer recommending it. Now I'm demanding it. Just so you know, I never talked to my mom like this. I did then, though. Why? Because my mom's mom, died with Alzheimer. My grandmother's sister died with Alzheimer. Unfortunately, there is a genetic component for it. So I told my mom, if not for yourself, then for your children and grandchildren. And she started exercising religiously 3 times a week, even, listen to this, even if it is at the expense of babysitting our children. And I'll explain to you why. Because, you know, we figured if she exercises, we'll have her around for longer. So it's actually a good investment. So we encourage it. At every age, regular physical exercise. Now, the nice thing about exercise is that it can be, not always, but it can be fun. So identify the kind of exercise that's fun for you. Or what you can do, and that's perfectly fine when it comes to exercise. Multitask. Do it in front of a television screen, or go for a walk. Many of my meetings are conducted walking. That's exercise and meeting. 2 birds with 1 stone. But do it. It makes a difference. It's one of the most important components, certainly of a healthy life and also of a happy life. The second element of our cocktail, something that's very important for me that you do. You must continue breathing. Don't stop breathing, even after this lecture is over. Specifically, what I mean is deep breathing. We had forgotten how to breathe. So we breathe and we largely stop our breath here. It's a shallow breath. Why did we forget how to breathe? Because of the crazy, busy, fast pace of modern life. You see, here is how it works. When we're stressed, when we're anxious, and this very often happens in the modern world, our breath becomes shallow. And when our breath is shallow, we actually become more stressed and anxious. And then we go in a downward spiral, the fight or flight response, the downward spiral of more anxiety and shallower breathing and more anxiety and on and on. The thing, though, is the fortunate thing is that we can get out of the fight or flight response and enter the relaxation response with as few as 3 or 4 deep breaths. Why? Because this is how it works. You see, when we're calm, when we're experiencing levels of happiness, we tend to breathe more deeply. When we breathe more deeply, we tend to experience more calm and more happiness, and so on in an upward spiral. From fight or flight response to relaxation response in 3 to 4 deep breaths. There's a wonderful book by Thomas Crum called 3 Deep Breaths, where he talks about the physiology of it and the importance of introducing as a ritual few deep breaths throughout the day. So 4 or 5 times of 3 to 4 deep breaths. You know, we can do it when we wake up first thing in the morning, or before we go to bed, or as we enter our office, or as we come home. Another advice that he has there, that every time you get to a red light, you take 3 deep breaths. You know, that changed not just my life, it changed my driving. Because, you know, here is a part of self-disclosure. I learned how to drive in 2 places, in Tel Aviv and in Boston. Not the best places to learn how to drive. When it got worse? When I got to a red light. And you know when it got worse in a red light? When there was this, in front of me, who just didn't see that the light was turning green soon enough. But now, over the last few years, I have a ritual. Every time I get to a red light, I take deep breaths. And it changed my experience of driving as a whole. It's almost like I've become one of Pavlov's dogs. I've been conditioned. Oh, red light. Relax. Small changes can make a big difference, not just to your driving, life as a whole. It's a total of 3, 4, 5 minutes a day of deep breathing that can impact your overall experience. I want to quote Andrew Weil, who is a real doctor, as my grandmother would say, who's done a lot of research in the mind-body area. And here is what he said. If I had to limit my advice on healthier living to just one tip, it would be simply to learn how to breathe correctly. To breathe correctly means to take in a deep breath, to fill up your lungs, to fill up your belly, and to breathe out. One of the things that we have on Happier TV are exercises, 1-minute exercises, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and 20-minute exercises that will help you breathe more deeply, that will remind you. And you can do it any time during the day. Now, if you have 20 minutes to meditate and breathe deeply, great. If you only have 1 minute here and there, that's great too. The next part of the cocktail, after you make sure that you breathe, is to make sure that you sleep. So, a professor comes to class one day, begins his lecture, and suddenly he notices that one of his students has fallen asleep. It happens. So he calls the student who was sitting right next to the sleeping beauty, and he says, excuse me, do you mind waking up your friend? So the student says to the professor, Professor, with all due respect, you put him to sleep, you wake him up. But I promise I won't wake you up. You can sleep away. Why? Because sleep is very important for happiness. There's a lot of research on sleep showing that it's a very sound investment. What's an investment? Investment is losing something, giving something up for the sake of greater returns in the future. Yes, when we sleep, we're not getting things done. However, it's a good investment because we can get a lot more done afterwards. Think about a racing car going around the track again and again. It has to take a pit stop at some point. Now, when it takes the pit stop, it's stopping. That's why they call it pit stop. It's stopping. Other cars take over, but it's still doing it. Why? Because if the car didn't take the pit stop, the tires would blow up or it would run out of fuel. In the same way, human beings, we need the sleep. It's a good investment so that we continue to go at full speed, at maximum happiness. It significantly increases our psychological well-being. In fact, sleep provides us, or enables, rather, the internal healer. You know that, in general, on average, the earlier dreams at night are more negative than the later dreams that are actually more positive. It doesn't mean that we can't have a nightmare just before we wake up in the morning, but on average, in general, the earlier dreams are more negative, later dreams are more positive. Why? Because what we do during sleep is we resolve conflicts. We have a conflict at the beginning of the night that we went to sleep with, and over time, that conflict is resolved. People who don't sleep enough are much more susceptible to anxiety, much more susceptible to depression. You know, when a baby doesn't sleep or when a young child doesn't sleep, they become cranky. So do we as adults. We may be able to hide it better, but we still experience it. Sleep is a good investment when it comes to our psychological well-being. Memory and creativity improve significantly. It's no coincidence that we very often wake up in the morning with a solution to the problem we went to sleep with, because our mind, our subconscious mind, is working. Just like it solves conflicts, it also solves mathematical problems that we go to sleep with, or work problems, or relationship issues. We also remember a lot better after a good night's sleep. That's when the neural pathways are formed, are fortified. That's when our memory shifts from short-term to long-term memory. But it doesn't happen if we don't get enough sleep. What's enough sleep? Ideally between 7 to 9 hours. It varies. Different people need different amounts. Ideally biphasic, meaning one long stretch at night and then a shorter nap in the afternoon, a Schlafstunde. Okay, yes, I know. It's not realistic for most people to take a nap. Not realistic. However, if you can afford it, do it. Even if you do it once or twice a week, over the weekend, it makes a big difference. You know who was the biggest proponent, the biggest champion of naps in history? Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill, in his autobiography, writes that if he didn't take a nap daily during the war, he would not have survived the war. Now, if Winston Churchill could afford an hour, I think we can too. And you know what? If you don't have an hour, it's been shown that 18 minutes nap can go a long way in resetting our cognitive functioning. 18 minutes, we can afford. I have a friend who is the CEO of one of the largest hospitals. And what he said is, after reading the research on sleep and naps, he closes his door and takes a nap every day at work. But as I said, even if you can't afford daily nap, even once or twice a week can make a difference. And the fourth part of the cocktail is touch. As a culture, we have lost touch with touch. We focus a great deal on taste. We focus a great deal on smells. We put a lot of emphasis on 4 of our senses, sound and sight, but not on touch. And touch is important, is significant for our well-being, psychological as well as physical well-being. It's important from cradle to grave at all ages. Let me share with you a story of how important touch is. So they started to notice a certain phenomenon in a hospital where they had 2 NICU units, neonatal ICU units, where they had premature babies. And what they found was that the survival rate and the thriving rate of one of the units was a lot higher than the other. And they didn't understand why or how. They tested the air. Maybe the air quality was different. It was exactly the same. Maybe they were feeding them different things. They fed them the exact same thing. Maybe the procedure was different of what the doctor, it was the exact same thing. No difference. And yet, in one unit, they were much more likely to survive and thrive even a year later than the other units. And then one of the doctors decided to explore further and deeper. And he decided to spend the night in the NICU unit where the premature babies were doing a lot better. And he was lying there, hiding, when he suddenly heard the door open. And inside came one of the nurses who was on regular night shift. And she went to the first preemie, and she picked him up and held him and just talked to him and stroked him very gently. Stroked him for 10 minutes and then put him down. And then walked to the next premature baby and picked her up and just spoke to her and stroked her and touched her. And then to the next one, each one in that unit. And then she went out. Now this was not allowed. there was a rule that you cannot touch the premature babies. Why? They were not allowed to touch them because it was not sterile. And they were so weak and vulnerable, it was dangerous to touch them. But she did, against protocol, going against the rules, and she was found out. And that experience changed the way premature babies are treated. Today, in every NICU hospital, in every unit, there is a real emphasis on touching. They encourage the parents to touch them very gently, but to stroke them. And what they find, that 45 minutes a day of touching, of gentle massaging, significantly improve cognitive functioning and significantly enhances weight gain, which in many cases is the difference between life and death in those little babies, even when you look at them a year later. And it impacts them for the rest of their lives, because that first year makes a big difference. At every age, we know there are many elderly people who experience premature death because they do not touch or are touched enough. It's a physical and psychological need. And in fact, there is research on just hugs. So Jane Clipman asked people to hug 5 extra times a day. Frontal, non-sexual hugs. 5 extra times a day. And what they found after a month of doing so on a regular basis, levels of happiness went up significantly. There is much truth in what Virginia Satir said. We need 4 hugs a day for survival. We need 8 hugs a day for maintenance. We need 12 hugs a day for growth. And as I mentioned earlier, you cannot overdose on this. I'd like to end with a brief story that captures my path to happier TV, the first steps that I took that brought me here. In February 2006, my class on positive psychology, the science of happiness, became the largest class at Harvard. It was written about in the Harvard Crimson, the local university newspaper, in February. In the beginning of March, I received a phone call from Carrie Goldberg. Carrie Goldberg was a writer for the Boston Globe. And she said to me, I read about your class in the Harvard Crimson, and I want to write about it for the Globe. She came to visit on the 7th of March, 2006, a Tuesday. She sat in class. Afterwards, she interviewed me. And on Thursday, March 9th, she called me up to tell me that it's going to appear in tomorrow's Globe. And not only is it going to appear in tomorrow's Globe, it may even be in the science section, but the front page of the science section. And I said, that's great. I go to sleep on that Thursday night. At around 6:30 a.m., the phone rings. I pick it up and I say hello. And on the other side, a voice screams something to the effect of, hello, this is John from WBZ or whatever radio. Do you know that you're the front page of the Boston Globe? And I said, no, I didn't know, but that's great. And then he said to me, you know, for a guy who's teaching a class on happiness, you don't sound very happy. And I said to him, you know, one of the things that I teach in my class on happiness is that sleep is important for happiness. This was the beginning of a crazy day and a crazy few years hence. On that day, the 10th of March, 2006, I received phone calls and had interviews on CNN, NBC, CBS, Korean TV, Italian TV, and the list goes on. My life changed radically on that day. And I was very happy about that to a degree. But the thing that really made me happy on that day was that I received an email from Professor Martin Seligman. Martin Seligman was and is my hero. I studied Martin Seligman when I studied Introduction to Psychology in 1992. I studied Martin Seligman for my dissertation. I taught his work. I admired him. And he emailed me a personal email writing the following. I read about your class in the Boston Globe. Congratulations. It's terrific for positive psychology, what you're doing. The next time you happen to be in Philadelphia, why don't you come and see me? Now you won't believe this. I happened to be in Philadelphia 2 days later. What a coincidence. So I went to see Marty Seligman in Philadelphia, invited me over to his home. We sat in his beautiful rose garden, and we were talking about the past, present, future of psychology, or positive psychology. Or rather, he was talking, I was too tongue-tied to talk, too nervous and excited. And then he suddenly said the following. He said, Tal, you know what the problem is with psychology today? And I said, what? Taking out my notebook. He said, the problem with psychology today is that our focus has been too much on neck up, whereas most of what happens to us is neck down. Now, when Marty Seligman says this, it means a lot for various reasons. One reason is it's Marty Seligman, one of the leading researchers of the 20th and beginning of the 21st century. A very important scholar, researcher, who's made huge breakthroughs in the world of psychology. But the second important reason is because he's also one of the founders of cognitive psychology. Now, cognitive psychology is cognitive, neck up. So for him to say what he said means that he thought about it a lot. And he's absolutely right. If we want to lead a full and fulfilling life, if we want to fulfill our potential for happiness, we can't just look at neck up. We need to look at the person as a whole, which means we need to look at spiritual well-being, which is also looking outside ourselves. If we want to experience happiness, we need to look at physical well-being, neck down. We need to look at also intellectual well-being, neck up, because this is also part of being a human. We need to look at relational, interpersonal well-being, because that matters a great deal to our happiness. And we also need to look, of course, at emotional well-being, at experiencing pleasure, at learning to deal with painful emotions. And it is only when we look at these components, at the spiritual, at the physical, at the intellectual, at the relational, at the emotional, that we can experience not just well-being, but whole person well-being, or in a word, whole being. And that's when we can enjoy a full and fulfilling life. That's when we can experience deep and real happiness. Thank you. Thank you.